is uh, this is me. This is a live bit, and we have just paid a tribute to Stephen Catlin, a concert in whose memory it will be held at the town hall this evening, and I'm minded that with Stephen appearing and being centre stage, as it were, just what characters we have in Lewis, and two that appear regularly on Mirador television are the two R's, the two B's rather, the two barristers, and they together can sometimes be hilarious, sometimes be informative, and sometimes completely out of control. So I'm going to play the last session that they had together on Mirador, and I hope you enjoy it. And that should be followed by John Henty. So here we go with the Hello and welcome to an afternoon version of the two Bs. And there they are, the two Bs, disturbing my mid-afternoon nap. But I guess we'd better let you know who we are. Right, gentlemen, now so I can just go crawl into the corner and go back to sleep again. Over to you.
Well, Keith, that's very kind of you, but I do intend to engage you in this conversation. Oh. But before I do so, because I always like to have something slightly from behind my left ear, as Philip knows full well, I have, since the start of lockdown, produced a 20-question quiz for a Zoom meeting that my extended family have every Sunday evening. So I have literally hundreds of questions, but I'm going to ask you two of them now. I always have 10 questions on a given subject. I'm not going to trouble you with those. And then I have 10 questions on the news. So the first one I have for you that you might get is, which well-known celebrity at the age of 83 is said to be coming back to perform on Strictly Come Dancing after famously dancing 40 odd years ago in a way that some people found shocking? No. And if I said
chap that went to Australia under a cloud.
No, I'm going to say
no, it's the oh my goodness, the lady, then TV newsreader.
Yep.
Who
Angela Rippon.
I remember revealed the most amazing pair of legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, she was. No, I'm afraid to say that Keith's got the point there because he got the name. It is Angela Rippon. Yeah.
Correct.
What a team we make, Philip.
you look back on it now and you think,
tame.
Tame. But at the time, it was just sort of shocking, wasn't it? Well, that a newsreader might show their legs. Yeah. And the other question I have for you, which I always like to have a question every week that just makes me laugh and laugh and laugh. So I look these things up. So I'm going to ask you about the Hangzhou Zoo in China, Eastern China, and what announcement they've had to make about their Malaysian sun bears. A sun bear being a relatively small bear but there were rumors being put around on the internet about them. I do like this. I do like this one. You won't, I'm not suggesting you'll get it, but you'll like it. Any takers?
No.
Richard, I know because you try these damn questions on me all the time.
Yeah.
That most of them, to anybody with a normal life,
Yeah,
and with
that's
a
a
normal
fair comment.
interest in things, will never get the answers.
Yeah.
No doubt these sun bears were being hired out for sexual purposes. I've no idea.
No, it was the rumor that was being put around was that they were, in fact, they were humans dressed up as bears. and
people, they were your height.
Yeah, people believed it. People, in China believed that this zoo was fooling them by getting effectively Ewoks to appear and come out and walk around, as opposed to real bears. And this zoo has had to say, no, promise you, they are real bears. And there's another zoo in China that apparently had to prove to members of the public that their zebras weren't donkeys that had been painted. How good is that? How good is that?
Well, it's very good. Many years ago, my wife bought a dog, a puppy.
Yeah.
Ostensibly a full pedigree border terrier. We paid in those days really a large amount of money for this puppy, for a bunch of ne'er-do-wells nearby.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I swear to God, the black ring round its tail had been painted on.
Yes.
The bordering on a border terrier, as he became known locally, was only a bit border.
Yeah.
But bless him, he was a tough old soul, and because he was in such a bad way, in the end we had to euthanize him when he was 21. So he had a long life.
That is a good age. Yeah. I did. Yeah. Mm.
A ridiculous escape artist. He got me into trouble with so many neighbours.
Oh yeah. They do.
And funnily, one of the neighbours who are still down the road from us, they used to keep rabbits and guinea pigs.
Oh, jeez.
And Barney would escape into their garden and absolutely terrorise these poor animals. Thankfully, they were in their cages. And then one day there came through the door this spoof county court claim for pain and suffering and psychological damage to guinea pigs and rabbits because of Barney's behaviour, supported by a spoof psychological report on the guinea pigs and the rabbits. Yeah. It was a really funny way of saying, keep your dog away from my effing animals.
Yes. I remember, I may have told you this, Phil. I think I probably have, but when my parents sadly were on their way out in 2015, both of them, my sister looked after their dog for a while and then couldn't cope with it. And my parents got him on the basis that he was a Chihuahua. He wasn't. Not one of his legs was the same length as any other leg. He was a wobbly table of a dog. And he was twice the size of a Chihuahua. And he hated me. Really, really hated. I'd go to my parents' little council house. I'd go into the kitchen, make a cup of tea. and he'd deliberately sit behind, just at the kitchen door, and go at me.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, and my sister couldn't cope with him, and so I said, look, I was over in Chichester, and I went up to Berkshire, where my parents then lived, and I was suited and booted because I was at work, and at Reading Station, which is now a lovely, as you may know, a beautiful station that's been renovated. And I was there with this sort of zombie dog who could hardly walk. It was hippity hoppity hippity, and people were looking at me as if to say, "What the hell have you got there, mate? What is that?" And I was feeling the same, but I did bring him home, and we looked after him for the rest of his natural. And some of his unnatural, I reckon, in his case, because as I say, I think he was a zombie dog. But, dogs.
So in canine terms, he may have been the Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah. I remember my mother laughing at me so much because she said, we've got this Chihuahua. And then he just grewed and grewed and grewed, as they say.
I only had to hear the
And she says, I don't really know what was the problem with that dog. And I said, it's the whippet in him. And she did laugh a lot at that because he did have the sort of back end of a whippet and the front end of a Chihuahua, which isn't it's not a great look, is it? It's a bit like you, Phil. We've never seen your body.
Come back into the studio because from one coupling to another, here we are with
yes,
plenty of Henty.
Yes.
And he's here with his famous bag.
Yes.
God only knows what he's got in the bag this morning. But he's also come in with something that looks like a heater.
Well, no. All will be revealed, ladies and gentlemen. I know you can hardly wait. Talk of whippets and chihuahuas, I'm afraid. I start thinking of Max Miller, but I shouldn't. It's a long story, and we won't bore you with it. No, today I hadn't warned my colleague here, Keith, on the right, that I am going to make a proposal which he may or may not like, and it'll be too late because we're live. So you may be the first to see this anywhere in the world. I have a revolutionary plan that is going to bring peace in our times. Now you may have heard that before. I know 1939. I was there. I was listening at the age of 3. I heard it all, Neville Chamberlain and the rest of them. And I remember the air raid sirens on September the 3rd, 1939, all of this history. But then they said, well, peace in our time, and waved a piece of paper. Now I'm doing something much better than that. I'm actually producing evidence. And what we have on the right, which you will see in a moment, is part of that evidence. Because, and this is the whole point here, what we need for peace in our time is something that this man in particular, as a broadcaster, fears more than anything else in the world. Now, I need to explain what that is, and I'm going to...
Huh? What's happened to you?
Exactly. Exactly. You fear silence. And in broadcasting terms, and I remember this in the halcyon days of Radio Brighton, in Brighton, of course.
Dead air.
That it was called dead air, and you had to avoid dead air at all costs. In Brighton in particular, because if there was dead air for more than 30 seconds, the transmitters were switched off at Whitehawk and in Shoreham as well, which meant that the local radio service, available only to those on VHF, was gone. And once it had gone, heaven knows who was going to go up the transmitter and the rest of it to get it going again. So you never had silence. The trouble with that theory, and this is getting to the point, is that silence is a beautiful thing. And instead of fearing it, we should embrace it. That's what today is all about. And I'll explain why very briefly. I won't do that again, but I mean, that is terrifying when suddenly stops. Now, when you're interviewing someone, and again, Keith has interviewed hundreds of people, notable people, the big fear is, of course, that if they dry up, you think, oh my goodness, what's my next question? You should always have the next question, of course. However, when they dry up, my colleague who used to live here in Lewes, his name was Keith Slade, and he was a wonderful, creative, artistic producer. And he always told me that what you should do is you don't jump in and cover the silence. You wait, because very often the person you're talking to will come up with something even better. Don't kill the silence. So how do you create silence? That is basically the question. And is it important? And the answer is it is important, because most of the problems in the world today have been created by noise. And we need to get used to silence. And I'll explain why too. For example, cars in the future, I'm told, are going to be silent. Now, that's going to disappoint one heck of a lot of people who built through this town, your town, Brighton, making the most terrible noise. Right. It's going to do away with that. They're not going to be happy, but they've got to get used to it. Quiet, silent cars. One. Then there are other forms of silence that are going to happen. For example, forget Brands Hatch, forget Silverstone, forget Worldwide Grand Prix. Why do people go in the main? The thrill of the sport, yes, but equally because of the raw one and the possibility that someone might tip over, smash into other people, and all hell will break loose. Now, if they all had to go electric, and I have no evidence of that, then can you imagine the crowds hoarding to Silverstone or anywhere else to see cars going round silently? No. Silence is frightening, but it should be embraced. And of course, in terms of meditation, it's the best way, in fact, to achieve silence, as long as you can fill that silence with something purposeful. So my feeling today, this is rather revolutionary, and I've not put this to my friend, and he may very well decide to reject it. I accept that. I think for a couple of minutes, we should achieve silence here on Mirador television. Now, I've already noticed several people say, good idea, about time, too much rabbit, precisely. We are going to do away with it just for a couple of minutes. We'll see what happens. Now, you're also going to say, but, don't tell me we're going to have to sit and look at him and the other man for two whole minutes. I mean, and then be silent about it. We're all going to be thinking and probably voicing out loud, look, those two people should not be doing what they're doing, sitting there, valuable time. Therefore, there needs to be a diversion. You cannot look at us for 2 minutes and just sit quietly. So what I'm hoping we can achieve is we will sit quietly. And it goes back to the days of television when there used to be a potter's wheel. Do you remember that?
The
Exactly.
potter's wheel.
We haven't got one in here. You haven't got a potter's wheel.
Unfortunately, no, but we mentioned it many a time. And,
precisely. Exactly. A lovely, lovely idea, a creative force. And you just sat and looked at it. And I've noticed recently I think it is, you see the noise that fellow went past. I mean, he loved it.
Yeah.
The more noise he could make, the better, you see. And by the way, I had an Italian meal yesterday, lunchtime, in Brighton. I couldn't hear a word of what my colleague was saying, and the noise was deafening. Have you been to a restaurant, any restaurant recently? Too much noise. Let's have some peace as well as the food. However, the other thing is, of course, in addition to the potter's wheel, they also have birds singing as well. And recently on Radio 4, towards the news, I think at 6 o'clock with Evan Davis, splendid man, by the way, and they've actually introduced different bird sounds, and we could sit there quietly just before the dreaded pips. And that's another thing. Keith will all know about Greenwich time signal. Dreaded. And if you crash the I mean, you're out. I mean, why did Ken Bruce go? Because he crash the pips, of
Yes,
course.
I mean, not allowed to stay in the country. You were sent into exile.
Oh my goodness me! I mean, never ever do
No,
that.
no.
There's an immaculate moment when the silence and then the pips, perfect. Crash the silence, you're out. So we won't do that. But what we are going to do, with Keith's approval, do you think so, Keith?
I think yes.
I suggest.
I'm game for anything.
All right. Well, I haven't got my stopwatch, my famous stopwatch with me today, but I think we'll give it a minute because, after all, this is something new to our viewers as well, and they may be a little disturbed by it. I don't want them to be, because I want them to sit quietly, as we will. You may hear a little bit of noise in the background, and then I'm going to tell you something else after that of how I developed this idea to the point of actually raising money through selling people silence. Now, you're going to say, that is rubbish. I have evidence in that bag, which we'll come back to in a minute, which will show actually that I did do this and that this story went all around the world. Maybe I've told it before. I'm going to relate it again. So what we're going to do now, the item I have here is equivalent really of a potter's wheel. It is powered and it's going to be very restful. And for 1 minute, it's in color, and we're going to watch this. It's something I bought some time ago, and occasionally I produce it at home when I'm tired of watching Amal Raj introducing that university challenge. Instead of that, we sit and watch this going round and round and round. And you know, it's almost as pleasant. In fact, if I understand these. Now, here we are. This is where we get a bit technical. You may wonder what I'm talking about. This is the item that I'm talking about, and I don't know whether it's going to function, but once it starts functioning, ladies and gentlemen, there we are. That's a little better down there. Once it starts functioning, we're going to sit here, Keith and I, and we hope you will join us just for maybe 60 seconds of silence. Maybe a first on television, who knows? But let's see if this works. It does. Thank goodness for that. Can you see? Those are fish. And now, not only that, you can see that, and we can see it. And we're going to watch these for maybe 60 seconds, and we hope that you enjoy it. And while you're sitting there quietly, just enjoy the silence. Thank you, everyone. Thank you too, Keith. Now, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, I'm a bit worried. I heard movement. There's a man with 2 white coats just coming in. No, it's all right. It's all right, officer. No. Now, I hope everyone out there will appreciate that was a first for television and probably a last for television too. Because no doubt the moderators will be saying, look, there is a man there showing pictures of dead fish going past on the screen. That's not the point. The point is it was very pleasant sitting here. I calmed down a little bit, which is probably a good thing. I heard someone shout. And it allowed us to just think quietly for a moment, because I believe world peace. One of the problems with the world today is there's so much noise, much of that noise, words, whatever language they're in, and very often abusively shouted at people. And that's what causes all the, for example, if there is a knife crime somewhere in some park somewhere, why was that? As a direct result of probably someone slanging somebody off and then resenting it and producing whatever the weapon is. In other words, if there was silence, if we sat quietly in a park, and a lot of people do, by the way, so maybe I'm preaching to converted, especially people in Lewis, we do understand what silence is, and there are centres for meditation too, here and in Brighton. The fact is that peace can be very recuperative, if that's the right word. And just finally, the stories I mentioned before I stop, you'll be glad to know, and sit quietly. I did actually value silence to such an extent, and it was evident in a little church along here in the High Street, Westgate Chapel. And the gentleman, Jeremy Goring, was the minister at the time, needed to raise money. And I suggested to him that his greatest asset, apart from the actual teaching in the church, was the peace and quiet achieved away from the noise of the High Street. So we actually introduced the silence, we introduced the chapel, we opened the door, went in, and for about 30 minutes we recorded the sound basically of the wind blowing within this beautiful chapel, which is still there, and you can pop in and see it if you want to. And that was very recuperative. But would it raise money, and why money anyway? Because the chapel needed a lot of repair, and they thought, should we have a jumble sale? No. I said, what you have here is the quality of silence. So we put it on an audio cassette. I've got one in my little bag here at the moment, and I suppose I'm not going to start selling them because we've raised enough money, fortunately. So that's the end of the story. But yes, here it is. And also, you don't believe it, there it is. Now, I know audio cassettes now, people don't have cassette players, although some people do. And there it is. And if you put that on the audio cassette, which we can't today, what you would hear is practically nothing. And you might say, well, what's the point of that? And my argument is, for example, if you're sitting on a tube train where all the people today, nearly everybody is either looking at the screen or they're listening with these very superior earphones. If you sat there with your earphones listening to this while they're listening to babble and Euro trash, you could be sitting there listening to silence. And who would be better off at the end of the journey? You would. Finally, I tried to take this idea to America. That was because originally I did take to America when I went to San Francisco. And hello to Phil in north of San Francisco, watching at the moment. Good gracious. You know, it's nearly 3 o'clock in San Francisco at the moment.
Yeah, in the morning, yes.
Yes, in the morning,
Yes.
That's right. So thanks, Phil. It's very kind of you. Go back to bed after this. You've already gone back to bed. Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear. No, I decided when I went to California to live there forever. It didn't work out that way, as we remember. I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll take something to remind me of London. So in Piccadilly Circus, or just off Piccadilly Circus, Rupert Street, I think it was, there was a man there selling tins. And in those tins were fog. He was selling London fog. Now, at that time, of course, there was a lot of fog in London, and he marketed this. He thought, here's potential. So he put a lot of fog into the tins, and he sold me a tin of fog. So I thought, well, if I could sell a tin of fog, I could sell silence. And that's how it all came about. And we raised several £1,000s. And I had radio stations and TV stations all over the world, including Boston in America, and radios 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this country. And in particular, on Newsbeat on Radio 1, the presenter said, could we hear this tape, please, John? And I said, yes, just a minute. And for about 30 seconds on Newsbeat, which is a very loud news program on Radio 1 in those days, they had to listen to silence. So I achieved 30 seconons of silence on Radio 1. End of conversation. What do you think, everybody? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you like silence?
Well, am I right in thinking that Simon and Garfunkel is a sound of silence?
Sound of silence, exactly. Yes. And not only that, there's another band, and their hit was Silence is Golden, Golden. Yes. I think it was Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And funnily enough, you see, the reason why I got so much publicity was because, being the sort of chap that I am and that you are, I thought, well, I'll try and sell this cassette, but I better tell someone. So I did a press release on a Friday. And on the Monday, in the Guardian newspaper, front page, across 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, the story, Crumbling Church hopes silence will be golden. And there's the full story there. What year was that, John? It was 1991. And the man at the bottom said, well, quoting me, in fact, he is, however, unchallenged as the first man to market Westgate silence. Some other churches in Lewes have a terrible problem with traffic noise. He said, but the chapel is a place with silence, hallowed by the prayers of many generations. And do you know what? Finally, on June the 22nd, 1991, at the Westgate Chapel, we had a 12-hour sponsored silence open to the public. And a lot of people came, and we sat there for 12 hours quietly. And when we went home, we felt much better for it.
Yes, indeed. Can I add to that something that's a bit disturbing and a little serious? Scientists are becoming more concerned about noise pollution than they are air pollution. And a former colleague, in fact, he was my boss and became my friend at Reuters, was the bureau chief in Moscow and met a number of scientists who said, we want to do something about this. We can't do it in Russia because it's not the right environment. But we want to set up a little series of chambers, starting off with pure silence and working through each chamber until you come out at the other end into the sound of the buses and so on in Piccadilly Circus. And indeed, they designed this thing. Then to be able to support it financially, it was going to go into a theme park. And it was picked up by somebody like Disney, and then they changed their plans and it got dropped. But there was a billionaire who said to Mike, look, he said, I'll fund this. He said, I'll put billions into it if you can find a council in the United Kingdom that will actually accept it without trying to make some sort of financial gain for themselves. He's still looking.
Yes, absolutely. Because we joke, silence is golden. And I actually demonstrated that you can get people to recognize and spend money on achieving silence. Better not to, of course, it has to be said. And that is very sad story. Sad for a whole range of reasons, because the benefits are very clear. And I'll tell you something else about relationships too. Very often relationships can be ruined by the wrong words. The best relationships, and I think you're bound to agree with me, I know you achieved it in your life, and I like to think that I achieved it in mine. Very often you can sit with someone that you love for a good couple of hours, 3 hours, silently.
Absolutely.
Who needs words then?
Yeah.
Affection could be shown in that way.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
I know.
It's the best form of affection.
Absolutely.
It's
So
a great feeling of satisfaction.
Entirely right. People are probably going to say, oh, come on, you're just getting romanticizing and lyrical. But no, it's perfectly true. And you know, I think there are people actually at the moment nodding somewhere, actually saying that is absolutely right.
And that's our stock in trade, John, is to be romantic. Well, yes, leave pragmatism behind for this hour.
Oh,
yes.
That's very interesting, because funnily enough, it was a word that I've recently come across. I didn't have to look it up, as I did this morning in chiropody. I had to look up. I thought chiropody, that's feet, isn't it? No, the word that I like is because I've always regarded myself as a pragmatist. But the thing about, of course, silence is that you can forget that, of course, and lose those feelings simply in the silence. And one other thing too, a lot of people say, but it's all very well, John, but you know, apart from the fish going round and round and round, I have lots of thoughts flooding into my mind. Well, the point is that you gradually learn by breathing properly. You gradually learn to ease those thoughts. And if you do have those thoughts, the other thing, obviously, is if you've got a piece of paper and a pencil, actually write them down there. And then go back to sitting quietly. And then when you've come out of that silence, you can look at that little list and think, yes, I could do that, I could do that, and I could do that. Oh.
Of course, it raises that old question of, if a tree falls down in the middle of a huge forest, does it make a sound?
Oh. You think that it probably does?
I think it probably doesn't, because it needs an ear to make sound realistic.
Precisely. Which goes back to our argument about television, radio. This is absolutely useless, and we know that, but happily we know that there are viewers. This without viewers would be rather foolish. Radio without listeners would be a total, utter waste of time. And in some cases, I think there's a lot of radio at the moment that doesn't have listeners and is a waste of time. That's another entirely different story. No. Listeners are crucial. And also, if you can learn how to create silence, learn how to listen as well.
Yes, absolutely.
My goodness me. I think we should label this today. I don't know. One newspaper, another newspaper carrying the story, said that, asked me whether I was confident about raising money through silence. And I thought the answer was excellent. I said, I am quietly confident. Get it? Yes. I mean, come on.
Oh, that goes down around with both ends of a sausage.
Sausages. Don't go to sausages. Well, thank you so much, everybody.
It really, quite fascinating, and it is interesting that this business of silence is. I've come across it a great deal, and I think it is worth raising.
It is,
and discussing, and I just wish that we could impose upon some council not to dip their hands into their pockets. And actually, in some of his experiences with councils, I mean, with what we would say is squeaky clean councils, is that they all wanted a piece of the action. Nobody would say, yes, okay, look, we'll go along with you, we'll work with you, and so on. So we don't want anything from it. And yet, here we've got scientists warning that our health, which is the forefront of thinking at the moment, our health is to some extent affected by noise.
There are, it has to be said, in Lewis and other places too, occasionally you will find workplaces where they have a quiet room. And I certainly recommend and encourage that. A room where staff can go away and not have to natter to other people, but just to sit quietly. And that is to be applauded.
Indeed. But of course, the trouble is that you go into a quiet room and you see somebody, and the first natural instinct is to say, hello.
It's terrible. I must admit, I mean, you've got to overcome that. I mean, if I walked in here this morning, as I did, and I came over here and I just sat down and said nothing, you would think there's something wrong with me, wouldn't you?
Yes.
You see, that's the trouble. So maybe we should have little captions which we carry around saying, I'm not talking today.
Yes, and I'm not sulking.
I'm not sulking. or equally, go away. Or why don't you talk to someone else, that woman over there? These are all brilliant ideas. They're all copyright Mirador Television. Mirador, Mirabar, wonderful. Whatever it is, it's valuable. Keep it.
I like that as a slogan. Mirador Television, the sound of silence.
Oh, it's wonderful. I want that. You know how you caption these various little items when they're on the various Facebooks. Could you possibly put that up there?
I can.
Would you do that?
Next Wednesday, you will have it here when you come in.
That would be rather splendid, because I think people should know. I mean, they may think, oh, hello, this is just John Henty on another rant. And you see, they would be wrong, because although I was ranting, it was with a purpose. And that was to talk about silence. Absolutely. And I've said enough, really. We could end, I suppose, if we were tootle pipping, we could end with the fish tank. Do you think?
Let's take a look at the fish tank. Let's end with 30 seconds of the fish tank, shall we?
Well, that's it. So I tell you what, thanks Keith for being here every weekday. It's splendid, and it's rotten weather at the moment. Take my word for it. Even I've got a hat which I'm not wearing at the moment. He's got his splendid cap. I love that cap. In fact, I love the blue sort of hat.
Yes, it just won't stand the wind.
No. And I saw, was it Stuart had an amazing hat I saw recently. Oh, you could hardly see his face. Oh, what a wonderful man. Men with hats. So what we're going to do, with his permission, after all, is I'll set this going, and the television will go quiet, and we hope you'll join us every weekday, of course, but particularly on Wednesday around this time. So shall I start it?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And hold it closer to the camera so everybody can see it.
Yeah,
Yes.
Here we go.
Yes. And that was the final word. Little bit.